to the meeting number 5 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, pursuant to the House Order of September 23rd, 2020. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website, and the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. With regards to the speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do our best to maintain a consolidated order of speaking for all the members, whether they're virtual or in person. Today, the committee is meeting to study the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic on women. And so welcome to our new witnesses. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. And when you're ready to speak, you can click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. And all comments should be addressed through the chair. Interpretation in this video conference works very much like in a regular committee meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen to pick English, French, or floor, which is whatever is being spoken. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly for the translators. And when you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. Now I'd like to welcome the witnesses who've come for our first panel. We have from Bay St. George Status of Women Council, Sharon Williston, who's the Executive Director. We have from the Conference for Advanced Life Underwriting, Cindy David, who's the Board Chair. And from CWCA or YWCA Canada, Maya Roy, who's the Chief Executive Officer, and Anjum Sultana, who's the National Director. So each of the groups will have 5 minutes for their opening comments, and then I will be gentle when I cut you off after your 5 minutes, and then we'll go into rounds of questions. And again, I will try to be sensitive, but we each one have 6 minutes for the first round, and you'll hear me say, that's your time, and that's how you'll know that we're moving on to someone else. So with that, we'll begin.
Madam Chair?
Yes?
Sorry, point over, just before you begin, sorry about that. I'm just having some garbling when you speak on the microphone, so I just wanted to know if other members are feeling this.
Same here. Same with me, yes.
All right.
And same here, and I also wanted to say my technical issues seem to be resolved. So thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that any better? No.
No.
Open to suggestions from the technical IT folks. Is that better? Maybe it's a volume thing.
Could we ask for a suspension, please?
Sure. If we'll just suspend briefly. Discussions with Sharon Williston for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you announced earlier, I work with the Bay St. George Status of Women Council as their executive director. I've been in the role since January of this year, and it was certainly a baptism by fire come mid-March when a lot of things changed here in Newfoundland and Labrador. I want to describe a little bit in regards to the geography in our area so that you can have a full understanding of what women are facing before COVID and during. So transportation, just as an example, there's no such thing as a city bus service within our area. So folks either have their own vehicles, depend upon taxis, or the generosity of friends and family to help transport them to where they need to go. And the area is quite large. Out on the Port-au-Port Peninsula, for someone to come into our area to access services, you're looking at a little over an hour drive. With the more remote areas as well, the access to reliable cell phone service and internet service leaves much to be desired. There's many areas where there's no services for these two ways to connect whatsoever. So when you're looking at isolation, that just escalates things even more. These things, of course, had a huge impact on being able to access community supports since COVID-19. We have done our best to be able to continue to provide programming through Zoom and other internet platforms. We have also gone out in community on a few occasions to offer in-person workshops, but at a reduced rate, needless to say. What we're seeing, what we're hearing from the women is that the impact of the isolation has been one of the hardest things. The inability to be able to connect with community services, to be able to socialize in groups for women who live alone has had a profound impact on the anxiety and stress levels that they've been experiencing. Where possible, we have been able to partner with other organizations in providing cell phones, tablets, and the like, so they're able to connect through the internet or through cell service. But once again, going to those women that are living in areas without those services being available, the isolation, as I said, is profound. Many women found themselves in the situation where they were at home and all of a sudden overnight becoming a teacher to their children. The stress levels went through the roof for many women because they were working from home, educating their children from home, and trying to make sure that the level of cleanliness that was required with COVID-19 of anyone going in and out of the home, it was so many different hats that they had to wear that they felt they weren't able to do justice to any of those. So once again, looking at that stress level and that anxiety level, we're seeing an increase in the number of referrals that we're doing to various supports such as Channel, Canadian Mental Health Association, Mental Health and Addictions, and so on. When we look at domestic violence, the RCMP and RNC within our province has reported that there was an actual decrease in numbers. That doesn't mean there was a decrease in cases. Oftentimes, it meant it was not safe to report. Being in isolation with your abuser is very difficult to be able to make those phone calls. Also, with having little to no access to affordable housing, many landlords were not renting to new tenants during the first few months of COVID. That just escalated things even more. What we have seen here through our center is that we're seeing a lot of women moving in with friends and family members. So those numbers are hidden in regards to how many are actually leaving those long-term relationships. We've noticed a spike in the number of women who have been leaving long-term relationships, 15 years or longer, and starting over. We're seeing these numbers through the amount of requests that we have received for home starter kits, seeing if they're able to access furniture through us, and other referrals through Newfoundland Labrador Housing, our housing support worker with Community Education Network, and so on. So we know that the numbers are there and they are indeed increasing. In regards to foods insecurity. Food First and Now had reported earlier that, pardon me? Food First and Now had
point of
reported
order.
in
Yes, absolutely.
cost
Point of order.
groceries by 20.
Sorry, point of order from Ms.
But,
Zahid.
sorry for interrupting, but the sound, there are a lot of noise in between and can't really hear properly.
Yes, the technicians are working on it. Do you want to continue or do you want to suspend for a few minutes while they work on it?
It's a lot of disturbance.
Yeah, I think we should suspend again. Just hang tight while the technicians get on it because it's important we hear the testimony.
Yes, Madam Chair, I think this is a good idea.
Good. Let's suspend. David, 5 minutes. And I've used half of it just getting my mic on. All right, good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you for that. Vice chairs and committee members. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land that I'm speaking from, it's the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, including the territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. I am the chair of the Conference for Advanced Life Underwritings. You might wonder what that means. We basically represent a big section of the financial services industry. We're the only professional association dedicated to leadership and advanced planning, solutions, and advocacy to promote financial health of Canadians. Our more than 600 members represent the top tier of insurance and financial advisors, as well as accounting, tax, legal, and actuarial experts. Ours has traditionally been a male-dominated industry, but this is changing. So we've seen an increase in the number of female advisors up to about 18% from 11 to 13% eight years ago, depending on which section of the industry you look at. While we have some way to go, women are clearly on the fast track for leadership in our industry. My appointment this year as the third female in almost 30 years of our organization provides some additional encouragement for this,
as do the other three female directors on our board. We are concerned about the advancement of women in financial services overall. You'll hear a lot of evidence about the outsized impacts of the pandemic on women, but many women are, whether it's our clients or people even trying to get into financial services industry, start in retail, hospitality, and healthcare that have been most affected. Because of the sections of industry that women tend to work in, this means that they've had to continue to work amid health risks for themselves and their families. So the rest of us have access to essential services. Added to the reality is that women take on the lion's share of childcare, homeschooling, and elder care needs, all of which have soared, obviously, through the pandemic. So there's no question that women have been the hardest hit and who have precarious employment or low income earners. They have the least ability to cushion the impact, make adjustments, and ride out the pandemic. At the same time, it's important to recognize the impact of COVID and the advancement of women across the economy. A recent study that we conducted at FEWO found that our female members have had a significantly greater impact on their businesses than our male members. And these women are amongst the most senior and successful advisors in Canada, yet they're too affected by a gender imbalance that sees childcare, homeschooling, and elder care fall disproportionately on their shoulders. So that's true for people in our industry as well as our female clients. So we're a big proponent of educating women on investing and on the creation of successful businesses. We would like to see a lot more women create new successful businesses that allow them to fulfill their potential, to create innovative and drive economic growth. It's also true for our leadership, our youth. We want to make sure that we not only take care of women as we try to survive this pandemic and succeed through it, but remembering that we have a second generation of female youth that we would like to train and grow and nurture so that they can be a big part of the business economy. Everybody is noticing the cost of childcare. It's a key hindrance to enabling a woman's advancement. But the same is true for elder care. So a national senior strategy is something that has been on our agenda for quite some time. And we feel that addressing elder care would free a big section of the female economy to be able to work and contribute.
Very good, and that's your time. So now we're going to go to Ms. Roy for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chairs, and committee members. Je m'appelle Maya Roy. Je suis la...
My name is Maya Roy. I'm the CEO of YWC Canada.
With 300 communities across 9 provinces and 2 territories, with 34 shelters on the ground and 2,000 units of affordable housing. The impact of the pandemic, the previous witnesses spoke very well to the lack of transportation, lack of internet access. In our shelters, we have seen demand increase anywhere between 20 to 40% across the country. We have also seen an increase in human trafficking and cases of sexual exploitation in communities such as Niagara, St. Catharines, and Halifax. And we've essentially also seen a very troubling turn in rural, remote, and northern communities. For example, With the lack of internet access, we have seen abusers, for example, refuse access to data or phone to women and gender diverse people in the pandemic. And as previous witnesses have stated, being in lockdown with your abuser can potentially be a death sentence. Another issue that we've seen is sometimes the conflicting public health measures and messaging. So for example, women fleeing violence in Northwest Territories are asked to check in with public health first before leaving an abusive relationship, and they're asked to call a phone number. When our frontline staff connected with this particular phone number, the lack of trauma-informed response, the lack of training meant that government officials didn't necessarily have the assessment skills to assist a woman to plan a safety plan. And we were quite concerned. So very important to have a gendered, trauma-informed approach to public health messaging, especially as gender-based violence is on the rise across the country, and the United Nations referred to this as a shadow pandemic. It's also given us an opportunity as a feminist organization to start to innovate and test new solutions. So for example, tech companies such as Uber stepped in to send in-kind rides for essential workers and women leaving abusive relationships to get to the shelters. Very important if we're not investing in public transportation across the country. We also partnered with a humanitarian aid organization, Global Medic, and worked with them to FedEx hand sanitizer to shelters in the Arctic. How can we possibly ask community members to physically distance or wash their hands regularly if, for example, over 60% of reserves do not have access to running water or potable water? So, you know, we have seen Canadians step up and they're interested in working with us on solutions. We also partnered with the Rotman School of Management at University of Toronto to start to develop a framework around a feminist economic recovery. And I'd like to now turn it over to my colleague, Anjum Sultana. She is the co-author of the Feminist Economic Recovery Report. Thank you.
Ms. Sultana, you're on mute.
Ms. Sultana, could you verify if you have a button that perhaps is muted on the cord? There's a little button on the cord of the mic often that could be muted. Unfortunately, we can't hear you, so we will have a technical person reach out to you, and unfortunately, we'll have to move to the next witness, but we will reach out to you via phone. Thank you.
All right, well then we will go to our first round of questions, 6 minutes, and we'll start with the wonderful Nellie Shin. There we go.
Thank you so much to all the panelists today. I feel the weight of the impact of COVID on the psychological strain, just the overall well-being, the wellness of women. And I just want to thank particularly the women with the YWCA. In my travels, I've stayed at different hotels and I've seen the programs that go on in those spaces, and I'm just very blessed to know that is happening. So thank you very much. What I'm hearing from all of you consistently is the repercussions of isolation, and it has a very strong impact on relational strain. And so my focus right now is, from what you've all shared, is on that stage of transition and recovery, coming out of those mental health related issues and the safety as well. So my first question actually has to do with, let's see, with the actual mental health aspect. I know some workplaces provide like counseling services and whatnot, but if you're working at home, taking care of children, and you don't have a place of employment that provides that special service, how are these women accessing mental health care? What programs are out there that is working for them, and what can we do better? Thank you. That's open for anyone.
Thank you very much for that very important question, and to the shout out to YWCA Canada. Yes, we have certainly seen, not just as a service provider, but also as an employer, the pressure of that triple burden of care for women when it comes to looking after children and elderly caregivers. One of the things we have been able to do, like many women's service providers, is work with, for example, the TELUS Foundation and try and shift all of our services online. It's very challenging, though, for many charities to do that work because many of us are actually under government funding not allowed to upgrade our computers. I have colleagues across the country, some of whom are literally on Windows 95, which our cybersecurity firm assures me is unhackable. That being said, that doesn't necessarily get at the mental health support that women need. We are creating spaces online, but I think if this committee can work with the bureaucracy and federal government to continue to invest in IT infrastructure supports across the country, because as we know, this is our new normal. And with the social isolation, women not only need access to internet, but they also need access to data and technology to even get that mental health support. Also, we're working with workspaces, for example, some credit unions across the country to start to develop, for example, childcare co-ops to look at ways that we can not only provide childcare in women's workspaces and homes, but they can also get some community support as well. But absolutely agree with the committee that this is a critical issue and additional investments are needed.
Thank you. The other question is similar to that, and that is related to women and domestic violence relationships. The exit strategy is becoming more complicated. Where are agencies like yours at in terms of providing a better exit strategy in this context of the pandemic?
It's been very challenging. At the beginning of the pandemic, there was an increase in women choosing to leave their relationships, as the witness from Newfoundland, St. John's also talked about. What we're seeing is, as with the second wave, as we start to go into lockdown again, as courts start to close down, it's very difficult to get protection orders for women. Also, many abusers are actually using the access visitation centers because those are also closed as well during lockdown. Abusers are using that as an opportunity to further harass women. With courts being closed and public transportation being shut down or not available at all in a community, it is getting harder and harder for a woman to safety plan and leave. And where we're worried is that many women are having to make the unfortunate choice of not being able to leave at all. Because of how the very necessary pandemic public health restrictions are actually stopping women from being able to move on to that next step.
Great, thank you so much. Do I have time for one more question? Sorry, can't hear you.
No, we're off to Miss Zahid for 6 minutes.
Thank you.
Ms. Zahid, you're on mute as well.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses for joining us today. My first question is for Ms. David. Ms. David, we know that one of the most effective ways to grow our economy is to ensure that everyone is part of it and as everyone is able to participate in it. That's why our government announced the first ever woman entrepreneur strategy, which was a 2 billion program and which seeks to double the number of women-owned businesses by 2025. And we cannot allow this pandemic to roll back the progress that has been made. So what recommendations for actions do you have for this committee so that we can reduce barriers for women entrepreneurs and women-led small businesses in the economic recovery? Because we all know that economic recovery will not be possible without the SHE recovery. So, Ms. David.
Thank you, MP Zahid. It's an excellent question, and I would say that we fully support the government's strategy of a growth-led economy or recovery versus increasing taxation. We always say that the two most stressful things in life are death and taxes, and um, they're both equally important, I would say. But I will focus on the taxation side since that is the sort of the reason I am here. Um, I've looked at the women's entrepreneur strategy, and it's fantastic. There's a lot of information on there. Everything about it was good. The only shortcoming I would say is that it's finished. It's done. The last dollar was given in 2019, and there's a big section of the website, and every section of that part of the website that says we are no longer accepting applications. There were some great businesses that were supported throughout that initiative. And I would say we need more of that. Um, so help for female business owners, support with their income tax, streamlining income tax. We have a lot of people just concerned about making payroll. About if you're a female business owner, you're worried about overhead. I spent $20,000 getting computer systems set up and supporting my staff, and not many people can afford that. So what are we doing to support getting more dollars in their pockets so that their businesses can thrive, so that they can continue to employ staff? Um, as well, what happens in an emergency? Everybody stops learning. So how can we encourage female advisors to continue their education path, and even support team members to continue their education throughout this uncertainty? Um, we also have a lot of barriers in legislation on transfer of wealth, on transfer of ownership of businesses that actually make it, we're incented to sell a business to a third party versus a family member. And this is an unintentional consequence of tax legislation. And we need to look at things like that were meant to do one thing, but are actually doing another, that discourage women in business.
Thank you. My next question is for Ms. Roy or Ms. Sultana, whoever can take it. I understand that YWCA is conducting a 3-year national study to identify practices to build social resilience and labor market access for the most vulnerable women. Can you speak a bit more in detail about this project and what you are hoping to learn from it? And if you are applying an intersectional lens to look at challenges for newcomer and minority women, and how important is this sort of research work to allowing policymakers to make face-based decisions? So if Ms. Roy or Ms. Sultana can take that.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Zahid, for that question. I'll take the question. Unfortunately, my colleague's headset mic is not working. The research that you describe has sat down and been led by newcomer and racialized women. One of the key themes that emerged from that research, which I'm sure will not be a surprise to anybody on this call, is the lack of affordable and accessible childcare is one of the key barriers to labor market access for newcomer and racialized and Black identified women. We've been looking very closely as a result at recommendations, for example, from the Quebec economist Pierre Fortin. When he looked at investments, for example, in Quebec, after 10, 15 years, he found that for every $100 that the Quebec government invested in universal affordable childcare, that not only did tax revenue increase, that both the federal and provincial governments received over $140 back in taxes for every $100 spent on childcare, they also saw workforce participation rates increase. So for us, what we're hearing from our service users on the ground is that we need different models of supporting affordable childcare right across the country. Many newcomer women also work in the childcare sector, but because the way the subsidies are structured, the pay for early childhood educators is so low that many newcomer and racialized women who work as early childhood educators are actually leaving the sector altogether. The pay is not worth it, and the health and safety risks with COVID is simply not worth it. YWCA recently did a survey.
I'm sorry, that's your time. But the good news is the technician has said that we fixed Miss Sultana's mic, and so I'm going to give her 2 minutes to continue.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Like Maya has talked about, the folks who were most impacted in this crisis were folks who were already marginalized, such as minority women, newcomer women, immigrant women, women with disabilities. And what this crisis has shown us, is that the old way of approaching things is no longer viable and is simply not enough. We need a new playbook to address the pandemic and its social and economic consequences. And YWC's work on a feminist economic recovery plan does just that. We launched it at the end of July. And what it does, it offers a starting point and a roadmap for action for a better, more resilient economy that works for us all. And the two key pieces of it, there's several recommendations, but two I want to highlight today is childcare. So in addition to the research that Maya pointed to, we actually saw also in the UK that when you invest any amount of money in care, it actually creates 2.7 times more jobs compared to an equivalent investment in construction. So this would translate into 6.3 times more jobs for women, 10% more jobs for men. And so when we're talking about what Maya talked about, the lack of adequate pay, investing in care and investing in decent work for care workers will actually help us all. In the UK, a 2.5% investment in the country's GDP could result in 1.5 million jobs. So I know the government has talked about creating 1 million jobs. It's a small investment. And what the research is telling us, investment in care, it goes farther for families, for communities, for gender equality, and yes, for Canada's economic recovery. And the last thing I'll say is that oftentimes in times of crisis, what gets us through is care and also community. So in terms of gender equality, what we see is investing in community-based organizations that make gender equality possible. And so what we'd like to see from the YWCA's perspective is investments in care and community. And this would, address the short-term impacts of COVID-19, the gendered impacts, but also set us up for success for decades and generations to come. So those are some of my remarks, and I'm happy for continuing the conversation and questions. Thank you so much.
Donc, merci. Les prochaines questions?
Next questions. Ms. LaRouche for 6 minutes. Thank you very much to all of our witnesses today. It is clear that there are many synergies between your organizations and the effect of the pandemic on women. Ms. Willinston, I have a question for you. What are the effects of COVID-19 that apply more to rural area women rather than urban women? I'd just like to hear you a bit more about the specific realities that these rural women are experiencing.
For rural women, the access to community services is going to be one of the biggest obstacles they're going to face. I'm going to give you an example here locally. Many of the volunteers in our community are seniors, and they're the most vulnerable with the COVID-19 pandemic. And as many seniors that take care of our local food bank. So when the middle of March came about, they had to close their doors for 6 weeks until another organization took over taking care of the availability of having food. So you're looking at very vulnerable people not having access to the food bank for over 6 weeks. So then it changed over to a drive-through method. And as I talked about earlier, not everyone has access to a vehicle here. Friends and family members could not drive them. Therefore, they were walking there. And it was in March. Well, at this point, April, but here the winters last quite a period of time, and we're going back into winter. So we worked with other local organizations to be able to provide a service where we receive the incoming calls and then organize volunteers to pick up those food hampers and deliver them to the doorsteps. That's just one example of some of the things that they're facing. In regards to the mental health aspect of it, we are doing everything we can to increase the capacity within our communities. I'm working with the Canadian Mental Health Association, and we're going to be delivering Safe Talk to over 50 individuals within the community in the next little while. And that's all about suicide intervention. We're also going to be delivering 2 assist trainings within the next 60 days as well. And I'm also working a lot with the Eastern Door Feather Carriers, which is a life promotion group, looking at through an Indigenous lens of helping people to overcome some of the challenges they're facing with their mental health. So the impact on rural is access, but we're trying to find creative ways and working together as different organizations to overcome those challenges.
Oui. Thank you so much for that. That was very interesting. I'd now like to continue with Ms. David. You talked about feminist financial or economic recovery. How is COVID going to create financial challenges and fiscal challenges for women? And what would a economic recovery that is feminist and fiscal economic recovery that is feminist look like? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. With regard to recovery, we're looking to have a focus on resolving gender-based decisions by lenders in particular that will affect women's ability to fund their businesses. I've experienced actually on both sides of the gender spectrum issues with bank loans when there's so much uncertainty becomes quite an issue. Improving, again, going back to taxes, just improving the tax regime affecting small business. We know small business is the backbone of our economy and has been particularly affected by the pandemic. A very specific example is the Form 2200 that requires thousands of pages to be filled out versus by everybody across the country, not one person, versus just a checkbox. So streamlining compliance. Every time we go to do something that takes us time to leap over hurdles versus doing our jobs. So allowing capital expenditures, as I mentioned, setting up home offices and becoming, the dynamic approach to business and how everybody has had to shift. We need to support that from a tax perspective, allowing deductions for those expenses. And to encourage the continuation of business so that people can sell their businesses as opposed to just winding them up. So we're looking specifically at things like the capital gains exemption for small business, even new tax like tax on split income. We've spent a lot of time since 2018 talking about that extremely complicated piece of legislation. So streamlining that, making it easier for people to understand how they can live by the rules and spend more time on their businesses being productive. So yeah, and I mentioned it already, the disincentive that we have for family businesses to continue selling from generation 1 to generation 2 and so on. That is a serious issue that is really catching people before the pandemic and especially post-pandemic. Reducing red tape and streamlining compliance are we think are key issues.
Excellent. Now we'll go to Ms. Matheson for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I really, to the YWCA members, Ms. Roy and Ms. Sultana, I really loved the title "Born to be Bold," and I really latch on to the idea that yes, of course, the status quo isn't working, and that we need to challenge that. We need to change things, and bold, courageous ideas are, I think, what will take us beyond this, much like we saw after or during World War II in terms of the creation of pension systems and EI systems and so on. So I'd like to talk more about, obviously, the need for universal, affordable, accessible childcare. and how I've certainly looked at the idea of the government introducing an act, a piece of legislation that would ensure that across the board, much like the Canada Health Act, for example, and ensuring that we have that equality. Quebec certainly gets to enjoy that. What would that mean for the rest of Canada?
Absolutely. I think it's been a very interesting moment the last 8 months because we've been talking about, as you know, universal childcare since the Royal Commission of the Status of Women in 1970. But I was at a meeting with the Niagara Chamber of Commerce, and every single Chamber of Commerce, including the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, has talked about the importance of universal childcare. This is one of those really golden opportunities as a country, as a society, where business, small business, labor, nonprofits, we actually all agree on something. And that's really what my colleague, Ms. Sultana, was talking about. If we invest in care work, that this is actually the foundation of having a proper restart for our economy. Many businesses now, too, are also losing good staff because women are excluding themselves. So it's also a talent pipeline issue.
Yes, and certainly we've seen in terms of how we viewed care work, both healthcare, long-term care, social work, childcare. A lot of, because I believe because it's female dominated, there is lower pay, there is a lack of respect, there is both racial and gender discrimination within those fields. So that's certainly been clear. And I've heard from childcare workers specifically who have addressed that directly and the desperate need that they have to hold on to their workforce. I wanted to talk too about a couple different programs, again being bold. So a lot of provinces, they have domestic violence leave. How would ensuring that across the board nationwide there was a paid domestic violence leave, how would that help? And two, in terms of when you're talking about education, training, moving the workforce forward and investments in that education, how would a guaranteed basic income or annual income help and achieve those goals for women?
Absolutely. Just very quickly, having federal legislation around paid domestic leave would be a huge step forward. As many of you on this committee know, the impact of gender-based violence on the economy results in a loss of billions of dollars to, for example, many of the businesses that Madame David works with. With respect to guaranteed minimum income, it's something certainly that the YWCA is exploring. We've been watching the research and data coming out of certain pilot projects in Canada, for example, in Northern Ontario and BC, but also in other countries such as Iceland and Denmark to look at the impact. We also know that this recession is increasing job loss, will only accelerate job loss due to automation. So I think, again, as policy makers, we need to start.
One moment. Point of order, I'm not getting interpretation.
Can we check the translation with the technicians?
Désolée.
And Ms. Matheson, if you can raise your mic a little bit as well. Okay, Ms. Roy?
Thank you. We have seen with this recession, it has only accelerated job loss due to automation, and that will disproportionately impact women, people of color.
Le son est pas assez bon pour une traduction.
What I'm hearing is that the sound quality is not sufficient for interpretation. You're getting nothing at all?
En français, est-ce que c'est d'accord?
We're supposed to.
If I resume in French, would that be okay?
Perhaps, Madame Roy, if you could speak as loudly as possible and slowly as possible, we'll give it another try. I do apologize for the many technical problems we're having today.
Yes, apologies. I would just leave it as this pandemic has only accelerated job loss due to automation.
And if I can supplement with respect to the childcare question. So One of the things that we would like to see is a nationwide approach to childcare, similar to the Canada Health Act. I think that's an excellent model to look at because what we need is high quality childcare across the country in rural, remote, northern communities from coast to coast to coast. And one of the challenges we found, and Maya talked about this, is that there is a lack of recruitment and retention. There are recruitment and retention challenges right now. And currently, we're at a deficit. We actually don't have the number of care workers we need. And that means communities are being left behind. People are being left behind. So I think absolutely a nationwide approach is necessary because it would help to create clarity around standards, around workforce development, and also recruiting for the future. Because many economists have talked about we are entering a period of slow growth. So that means we need all hands on deck. So every single barrier that is stopping labor market participation needs to be addressed. And childcare is one of the biggest ones we've seen in our work. So absolutely. And with respect to gender-based violence, again, there's an economic cost. It's also an infringement on human rights. So to the communities that we're part of across the country, they talk about we can't talk about economic recovery in a climate of hate, fear, discrimination, hate crimes. Those all have to be addressed for us to actually all get back to recovery. And so we don't have that K recovery that has been talked about quite a bit. So we don't see that disparity in building back better. So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Very good. Now we don't have time for a full second round. Would the will of the committee be to have each party be able to ask one question? Would that be acceptable? Yes? Okay. Well, we'll start with Ms. Wong then.
Thank you. And to save time, I just want to make sure that that I still thank everybody. Now, you brought a lot of perspective to our study, and mental wellness is one big thing, like seniors in social isolation, and suicide. I think it's coming up because there was a sad case in Vancouver just lately that a woman with depression from the Chinese community actually disappeared, and then her body was found in Stanley Park. So and this has bothered a lot of people. So my question to the panelists, is that how can you prevent suicide at this very, very challenging time? Now, one of our colleagues actually proposed a 988 number with people who actually got training so that they will be able to persuade these people who have suicidal intentions to to give up that idea of killing themselves. So I've thrown this question out to all of you, so whoever wants to take it up.
May I speak to this?
Sure.
Okay, great. So it's a very important question that you put forward. I'm involved with a number of different things regarding suicide prevention. So the applied suicide intervention skills training. We provide that to grow capacity within our communities as often as possible. Is to break down the stigma that's associated with suicide. It's allowing folks to have those safe places to talk about suicide, their thoughts of it, and not being judged for it. It's having them to have the opportunity to share their story and have someone who's going to listen and meet them where they are. So having those folks available through phone, yes, great, but we also need to have people that are available within the communities to provide that. And there's different ways of doing that. With applied suicide intervention skills training, the person who receives that training is able to help dismantle the plan for suicide if the person has a plan, and then they will help to create a safety for now plan. With Safe Talk training, the individuals can be 16 years of age or older, take part in the training, which is great to have our youth involved in that. And with that, it's once again how to identify when a person may be having thoughts of suicide, how to ask that difficult question, are you thinking about suicide? And what to do when they respond yes.
Excellent.
Now, changing it around a little bit, there's also availability through different organizations as well. I mentioned Eastern Door Feather Carriers. So they're looking at suicide prevention through an Indigenous lens in regards to helping people reconnect with the land, with their culture, with their traditions, with the elders.
All
so
right.
Once again,
sorry, I have to cut you off.
Yes,
We're trying to keep these short. I'm going to Miss Dillon for one question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. Since we're short on time, I can't delve deeper into these questions, but I would like to know from Mrs. Williston or Ms. Roy, who testified about the impact this, because we speak a lot about the impact on women and the elderly. I would like to know the impact that isolation has had on children when they are staying in a situation of domestic abuse, watching their mother get abused. Um, what what impact has this had on children, and has there been any help for children psychologically to deal with these issues? Because the mother is dealing with her own issues, whether it's psychological, emotional, physical violence, or abuse. The child is watching this, but she also has to protect her child as well. And I want to know if you can please shed some light on that. I think it's very important because these are future generations coming up, and we have to find a way to help the children as well and protect them. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much for that question. We have a number of YWCAs, such as YWCA Lethbridge, and they've actually developed the Butterfly program, which is a trauma-informed mental health program for children who have witnessed domestic violence. However, that's just one community in many communities across Canada. And I think, unfortunately, with schools being shut down, that will simply, unfortunately, intensify the impact of trauma on children. We know how it impacts children developmentally. There's no difference between being abused oneself and witnessing abuse of a parent. And I do thank you for raising that very important issue, but we do need a nationwide strategy because it's going to impact the economy and educational and development outcomes for generations. Thank you.
Excellent. Madame Larouche.
Ms. Larouche, you have the floor. You have one question. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the witnesses, Ms. Williston, Ms. Roy, Ms. David, and Ms. Sultana as well. And thank you for highlighting the work of the Quebec economist, Mr. Fortin, Ms. Sultana. You talked about various situations and ways in which the women were more impacted by the pandemic, and you've put forward ideas for relaunching the economy, for example, access to clean water, legislative measures, domestic violence, where we need to find ways to help women to get out of that cycle, and equal pay. How important is it to really look at all the gender-specific details when planning our recovery after COVID?
Thank you very much for that question. What the research tells us and what our experience on the ground in 300 communities across the country also demonstrates is we actually mathematically cannot have a recovery if we don't look at the experiences and needs of women. We need all hands on deck. So any single barrier, gendered barrier, a barrier based on racialization, a barrier against people with disabilities, that will hurt all of us. So again, I really want to make clear it's mathematically impossible to have an economic recovery if we don't have a gender lens, if we don't have a feminist lens. And so for us, part of what we need to also do is starting to measure what matters. Every month I look at the labor force numbers and we look at, our jobs coming back to pre-COVID levels. In addition to that, we also need to look at the job quality. Is it permanent? Is it full-time? Does it have good benefits and decent pay? Because when we have precarious work, we actually see people are at further risk of COVID because then they can't actually go back to work. They can't be there for their families, and that hurts all communities. And I think another piece of it is also, and I really appreciate this committee's focus on gender-based violence and also talking about housing and homelessness, because oftentimes economic recovery is just focused on GDP and job numbers. But what we've seen is that when homelessness is on the rise and gender-based violence is on the rise, that also stymies economic recovery. So when we look at what we want to see for this future society, we also need to change what we use as measures of success. So it's more fulsome for the actual realities on the ground.
All right, and to Miss Matheson.
That was a perfect segue, Ms. Sultana, because my question was just about that. It was about national housing, the affordability crisis. I've certainly seen this in London, the growing numbers of those who are living rough on the streets. There's a 5,000 person or family wait list for affordable housing. And this morning I was speaking to a woman specifically who was fleeing an abuser. She was in second stage housing, but it wasn't sufficient. It wasn't as she needed it, and the options and the choices were extremely limited. She was being shut out of that system. So I would love to hear from you about how important that specifically that second stage housing is to women fleeing violence, but the adequacy of it and the investments in a national housing strategy focused on that affordability piece, and what that plays for women.
I can share a bit and then also pass it to my colleague, Ms. Roy. One of the things that we have seen and we were pleased to see is in the National Housing Strategy, a 33% carve out for gender responsive investments. And that is the type of mechanism that would allow for us to have more second stage housing. The challenge has been we haven't seen the full rollout of that money. And so what we would like to see is all investments, anything related to housing, have that inbuilt gendered focus, because when we don't do that, we see the rise in hidden homelessness, as previous testimonials today have talked about. Oftentimes, the measures of homelessness is an underrepresentation, and so we need to consciously have that gendered focus. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Ms. Roy.
Quickly.
Especially for northern and remote communities, we need affordable housing. We've seen an increase in landlords sexually coercing women who are behind on their rent payments. So very important.
Wow. Mr. Erskine Smith, welcome to our committee. Would you like to take the last question on this panel?
Sure. I guess I'm most interested in the benefits, particularly as it relates to families that wouldn't be able to afford childcare, and maybe speak to the impact that that can have for families specifically that otherwise can't afford it.
Well, I am no expert in childcare, but I will say in British Columbia, the experience is access. Childcare services is typically full with a long wait list. So focusing on wait list and accessibility, what you would have to do, I would imagine, is support business owners getting into that line of work. Again, typically run by women. And it would be tax incentives, it would be streamlining regulation again, encouraging childcare. Real estate is very expensive, so there are many aspects of how you can make a daycare, increase the number of daycares and the number of workers in daycares.
That is a great segue into our next panel. So I want to thank the witnesses that we've had at this panel. You're awesome. And we're going to switch gears now, and we are going to go to our next panel. The first witness that we have on the next panel is from Canadian Childcare Network, and it's Kate Tenier. And we also have from Cardis, Andrea Rozek. And so each of you will have 5 minutes to make your remarks, and then we'll go to our round of questioning. So Kate, go ahead for 5 minutes. Yes, please.
If I may interject, I apologize. Ms. Tenier, could you put your mic down a little bit? It seems to be up high, and we're not able to catch your sound.
Sorry, I was having a drink of water. I'm sorry. So I do need my 5 minutes, and I'll start now. How is that? Is that good? Yeah, I just want to start by saying, oh, you know what? This is really breaking up. Yeah, I've got a bit of an issue. I actually wear hearing aids, and I'm getting feedback. I can't hear myself. Yeah.
Could we suspend briefly?
What's that? If you could, if everybody could just mute for a second and maybe with some, actually, okay. Okay. I'm gonna start again. Okay. Okay. Can you hear me? You can hear me. Okay, I'm going to try again. Okay, so I'll start now. Okay. Yeah. I just want to start by saying I concur with something Ms. David was saying. I started a neighborhood association several years ago and focusing on small businesses. Two of our most popular business owners are two women married to each other. And what hurt them the most in the pandemic was that they were not able to afford to pay their staff. And that's what, it was like a women helping women. And so that's something I can certainly see. So I'm addressing my comments to the Liberals who are once again trying to bring in a national childcare system for Canadians, a system that is as wrong now as it was last year and the year before that. I instead stand for strengthening our Canadian childcare network currently in existence, in which parents have successfully been choosing their own care for the past 40 years. The studies that you are being presented by your hand-picked advisors in favor of such a system are based upon research from years ago that never supported the claims they make. Renowned think tanks such as the EPPI Centre at the University of London state, politicians and policymakers should stop basing the case for expanding early years provision on old, inaccurate, and decontextualized data about long-term economic benefits. And the recognized leading expert in childcare cost-benefit analysis, Nobel laureate James Heckman says, I get the impression that early childhood advocates feel the need to put forward an appearance of unanimity, which in reality is an illusion. We need programs openly competing against each other. So why are you proposing this program? Because so many of your reasons are hugely problematic. You say you want to help low-income women in particular. Are you really wanting to provide childcare for these women just so they can go out and work minimum wage jobs for grocery chains who refuse to offer enough full-time work and have eliminated COVID pay even though they themselves saw profits rise during the pandemic?
One moment, I'm sorry to interject. If you could perhaps just bring your mic a little bit farther away from your mouth, I apologize. Okay, we're having a popping sound, so we're trying to improve that because we did lose interpretation at that point.
Okay.
And moving it up, does that sound good? Okay. Sorry, we'll continue.
Okay. And I'm asking, and are you really wanting to offer low-income women childcare so that they can be underpaid workers in seniors' long-term care homes? I'm asking you to look them in the eye and say, yep, we think it's more important that you work in these conditions and for that pay than to spend a few precious years looking after your own children. This is not progress, and I'm very progressive. Until you can assure that the work that these mothers are doing provides dignity and a living wage, all you're doing is providing a corporate subsidy to businesses to profit off their labor.
Désolé, point of order. I'm sorry, we've lost interpretation again. Could we try to move the mic a little bit down, a little bit farther away? I do apologize. A lot of audio.
Yeah. You want to try
Could I ask for a suspension, please?
Yes, let's suspend while we fix this.
Okay. Okay. Wow. That's okay. So you say in the throne speech that, listen, I really want to make this work. So tell me, I mean, I did the testing and stuff last week. Do you want me to move it up, down?
Let's move the mic up, please, closer to your nose and a little bit farther out. It's a popping sound that is causing the audio shock to our interpreters.
Okay. You know what? It could be, I'm just going to do something. I'm going to take my hearing aids off. It could be because of that. So just give me 1 second, okay? Yep.
Yes. Why don't
Sure.
we trade orders and we'll go to our other witness?
No, I'm going to continue. I will be 1 second, okay?
Okay.
Okay. So let's see if this helps. Anyways, I'm just gonna keep going. So you say in the throne speech that labor is on board and that you want to create more jobs. You can't honestly be willing to use 2- and 3-year-olds, i.e. put them in an unproven system just to create jobs for adults, whether it's to build daycares or have people work in them. You say you want to advance women's equality. Sweden, where 90% of young kids are in daycare, has one of the highest rates of gender workplace segregation in the world. Researcher Patricia Morgan writes that 20 years after universal childcare was implemented there, Sweden had a more gender segregated workforce than the US, the UK, and Germany. Indeed, it was more gender segregated than Asian countries like China, Hong Kong, and India. And even 30 years after the program was introduced, the OECD stated that, quote, pay differences remain significant and were not narrowing. This phenomena of a pink ghetto workforce, extensively written about internationally but never mentioned by universal advocates here, is a result of forcing all families to have both parents in the paid workforce, leading mothers to take on lesser jobs. And there's one more crucial thing. You say you want to provide quality care and education, especially for Canada's neediest kids. But in a memorandum on childcare financing co-written by one of your advisors, Armin Yanisian, it suggested that 4- and 5-year-olds across the country be given full-day kindergarten. This is not good. There never was a peer-reviewed body of research backing up its implementation in Ontario. There was, however, one indisputable fact. All 4- and 5-year-olds suddenly found themselves all day in ratios that were anywhere from 2 to 15 times worse than what they had been benefiting from outside of a half-day program. While ratios are not everything, they are essential. As a primary specialist elementary teacher who mainly taught grade 1, I know from experience that almost all young kids benefit more from low ratios with a not perfect but pretty good adult than in a large class taught by a professional such as me.
I apologize to intervene again. We have lost interpretation.
Okay, I've got one more paragraph, so I'm going to go ahead. You will have to explain to all Canadians how grandmothers, neighbors, trusted friends, co-ops, nannies, Montessori schools, small French schools, all private, small and large daycares, neighborhood home care, nursery schools, tag team parenting, and even parents themselves are all forms of care and early learning that will wither away once you redirect funding to a no-choice system. You need to be open and transparent about this to the Canadian people, open and transparent about this decidedly non-progressive move backward. Thank you.
Very good. Now we'll go to Ms. Mrozek for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair Gladue. I hear you have a book out, so thanks for advertising that multiple times. Cardis is a not-for-profit think tank. Over the course of more than a decade, we've compiled peer-reviewed childcare research, produced papers, including a recent collaborative effort called A Positive Vision for Childcare Across Canada. We've also done polling of Canadian childcare preferences, among other things. Today, I would like to comment on childcare data and then look at solutions for families both during and after a pandemic. Childcare is the care of a child, no matter who does it.
Childcare is not only a women's issue, but also a family issue. We have across Canada a tremendous and beautiful diversity of care options available, care that is both done and chosen by families according to their own cultures, their customs, traditions, and work needs. Prior to the pandemic, Statistics Canada data tells us that most parents do in fact find what they are looking for. 2/3 of parents report no difficulty in finding a space or a childcare arrangement. And only 3% of parents cite a shortage of spaces as a reason for not using non-parental childcare. Again, nationally, according to Statistics Canada, about 60% of children under 6 are in non-parental care. We don't know a lot about those 60%, whether they're in for 5 hours or 55 hours, but of those children, about half are in childcare centers or in a preschool program. What this means is if we consider all children in Canada under the age of 6, those both in parental care and in non-parental care, only 31% are currently in center-based spaces or preschool. Polls and surveys consistently show over years that parents do not prefer center spaces for their children. So the obvious implication of this is that by using public money to disproportionately fund spaces, the vast majority of Canadian children receive no benefit. Public funding for spaces is structurally opposed to equity for all families. And this inequity, I would argue, is particularly bad in a pandemic. At a time when mothers, both doing waged work and those not, most needed and continue to need support in the home, money is flowing to spaces sitting empty because we are sheltering in place. The data further suggests that it's not a lack of access to childcare that is preventing mothers from returning to waged work. In Ontario, 93% of daycares were back in operation by the end of September. But in places like Brampton, for example, only 20% of those spaces are occupied. I have the data for Alberta. They reported 94% of daycares were back operating with an enrollment rate of about 50%. This suggests that factors other than the availability of childcare spaces are at play when considering how and when mothers return to waged work, particularly in and after a pandemic. The federal government, I think, has many options to help families, and I will suggest 4 today. The first is arguably the most important, and it is to start consulting more widely with truly diverse communities, parents, child development experts. Gordon Neufeld is a treasure to Canada and a developmental psychologist who is based in Vancouver, specializes in attachment. The various economists who have done peer-reviewed research on the issue of quality in Quebec in particular, Stephen Lehrer, Milligan Baker Gruber, all of these people need to be involved and consulted. The research and the voices that I am bringing here today do in fact represent a majority of Canadians. Most Canadians want flexibility in how we care for our very youngest so families can do what work for us. Second, I would suggest we can enhance existing federal programs such as Successful Canada Child Benefit. Third, I might consider changes to make maternity and parental leave more flexible. Finally, bilateral federal provincial agreements, and particularly agreements with our First Nations, should maximize freedom and flexibility so as to honor the unique heritage, culture, history, and tradition of different cultures across Canada. There is little evidence that expanded space provision will help mothers return to waged work after the pandemic. There is evidence of an existing ecosystem of parental and non-parental childcare in Canada that is neither properly understood or accounted for and risks being steamrolled in a so-called universal system. The federal government should cherish and defend the beautiful choice and diversity and intricate patchwork quilt of variety that already exists in childcare across Canada today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to go to a round of questions, beginning with Ms. Jag Sahota. 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. Thank you for being here and for your presentation on a very important topic. So my question is to both of you. You both talked about the universal childcare not working. And that is something the Liberal government looks at as a model childcare for the rest of Canada. Why doesn't the Quebec model work? Maybe I can start with Katie. And you're on mute, Katie.
Yeah, I think I think there's a few reasons for it. First of all, Andrea has mentioned the Gruber-Baker-Milligan report, which shockingly, your advisors, the Liberal advisors, have not brought forth to you, and it points out serious concerns for the mental health and behavior problems that, yeah, hopefully this is working, that have happened. You know, we've had 20 years of a universal program in Quebec. I'm also just going to say, like, I'm a real feminist. My mother battled the nuns 70 years ago at U of T to get her commerce and finance degree, and then went on to get a graduate degree in economics. I have 4 sisters raised. I mean, so we have to put this out there. I'm really progressive. But what you're seeing with these universal programs, and as a former teacher, that when you take ratios really crammed into group care at such a young age, the problems actually don't often show up till later in the teen years. And this is what's happened. Unfortunately, I have so much other research I can read to you, but the time is limited. Sweden found this in droves, that the problem showed up as in teen years. Even their own health ministry is very concerned about the high level of suicide, ill behavior, depression in teens. The largest parents protest group in Sweden actually wanted to join our group and do a complaint to the United Nations to say that unless parents had the right to be able to, you know, look after their own children, problems that didn't show up till teen years were the result of a universal program. So it's simply put, you're not putting enough adults in little kids' lives. You are basically corralling kids on the cheap to raise them.
Could I jump in as well?
Yep.
So I think the Quebec model should be measured against the standards of universal childcare advocates and activists. And they have goals such as quality and universality. We've used the word universal. 30% of children in Quebec have access to those spaces. And economist Pierre Fortin has said that there's a 2-tier system there, and that the quality spaces are not accessible. And again, after 20 years, one would assume that this kind of thing could be ironed out if it were possible. So the system in the model that we're looking at to emulate in Canada is neither universal nor quality according to peer-reviewed research. The quality question is not up for debate. It's something that advocates for such a system speak about at their conferences and discuss how to improve it finally for children.
Yeah, if I can just add to what Andrea said, just last month, an article in iPolitics was quoting the Auditor General of Quebec, saying that Quebec budgets $2.4 billion a year for daycare, but still doesn't offer enough subsidized spaces to meet the needs of Canadian families. And while originally designed to give children from low-income families a better start in life, such children are underrepresented in Montreal and Laval daycare. So to Andrea's point, 20 years later, it's not even doing what it was supposed to be doing.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, do you have time?
Yes, 2 minutes.
Okay. To follow up on that question, why would the Quebec model be more likely to fail outside Quebec? Andrea?
I would speak to that. I've spoken a lot about ensuring that we respect the unique cultures and traditions and history of the places we come from. So Quebec has more of a social democratic history. It may be the one place in Canada where such a system could work better. I also am in favor of provincial jurisdiction being important on this issue. So certainly Quebec is free to follow a model that suits them, but Canada outside of Quebec does not have that same tradition. We do not have the same desire toward conformity, toward becoming Quebecois. We do not have language goals. We have a diversity of immigrants, newcomers, refugees, people who come from ethnic backgrounds, people who come from different places, who desire to raise their children in a very broad diversity of ways. And I believe it is very unlikely we will ever have enough money to fund that kind of diversity for the rest of Canada. There is an established literature in the academic literature in Quebec talking about assimilationist goals and uniformity for people coming into Quebec. And that kind of thing is not present in the rest of Canada from coast to coast to coast. We have diversity. We have people, again, coming from elsewhere who desire to raise their children in very unique and diverse ways and should not be discriminated against because they don't desire to use spaces in a childcare system.
Anything to add,
Now we'll go to Ms. Sidhu for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, all the witnesses being here with us. And as a member of committee, I know this year makes the 50th anniversary of the report of the Royal Commission on the Status of Women, an important milestone to remind us what has been accomplished since and the work that remains of advanced gender equality. We often take for granted how far we have to come, and the report explicitly states that expanding childcare is crucial. I know when I'm hearing from Brampton, I'm from Brampton, and in my riding alone, 24,000 children receive Canada Child Benefit. And we know we need to do more. But when I'm speaking with my residents, and they know that when 24,000 children come out of poverty with the Canada Child Benefit, it's a big help too. And I just want to say, do you know the federal government has a role helping worker provincial territories as well as families find good qualities. Daycares are not opened because of parents are fearing for COVID-19, and how federal government can play a role. My questions to Ms. Magic, can you explain me that?
How the federal government can play a role in helping families?
And as well as when they're helping with working with the provincial and territorial government.
Yes, I think that the role for the federal government is to establish very flexible standards that in any bilateral agreement, the provinces can have the choice about how to use any money that the federal government is giving. You've mentioned the CCB. It's not expressly a child care benefit, but Money for Parents is also a very effective way of ensuring that people have increased resources to establish and create the diversity of care that they prefer in their community. You spoke also of being from Brampton, and I think that there's intergenerational care that happens in homes and grandparents living with families and kids. Again, some of this is based on cultural preference. In a pandemic, I think that universal childcare was always a bad idea. I think it's a particularly bad idea in a pandemic because under those circumstances, parents are keeping their kids out of schools and out of spaces and to protect those elders living in their home. It is short-sighted to try and capitalize off of the pandemic to create a so-called universal system that people are not choosing to use.
Ms. Mosick, I know many of my residents, they are in a trucking business, manufacturing, food processing, and mostly they have elders, and they can provide a child care as well, and they can use Money Canada Child Benefit is also helping those families. I know we need a child care. That is why I've been in throne speech. I was very much impressive from the throne speech when we heard that the National Progress Report on Early Learning Childcare from the last year's states research shows that high quality childcare support positive child development outcomes, particularly among children from disadvantaged families. Studies indicate the high quality early learning and childcare has positive effects on child cognitive and social development, improves school readiness, and creates a foundation for lifelong learning. And Ms. Mosick, can you explain to the committee how women who have been hit hard by the pandemic, who don't have the luxury of affording private care and who don't have family members to depend on, will realistically be able to participate in the workplace about a publicly supporting childcare system?
So you spoke a lot about high quality. What we've seen through peer-reviewed research is that we don't establish high quality care via the universal system. And I'm very concerned that we would be replicating essentially a mediocre quality of care for families across the country. I think we need to turn back to the data when we look at those who are unable to access care today. And we find from Statistics Canada that while it can be very stressful, while a third of parents say they have a hard time, only 3% say they're not finding the childcare they need in order to return to the work circumstances that they desire. You mentioned also elders caring for kids. I don't happen to live near family, but I do think that kin care is a very important aspect of childcare provision. And we have peer-reviewed research, again, suggesting that kin care is more effective and higher quality than spaces in centers. I would advocate strongly for greater provision of monies to families to be able to support elders, family members, and community-based members to help with childcare needs in parental and non-parental childcare.
Do you think the isolation of kids is that main how it's impacting the women? I know Kids Helpline is there. Do you think Kids Helpline is helping many kids?
Sorry, are you talking to me?
No, Ms. Mosick.
Oh, sorry. You know what? I don't know a lot about Kids Helpline. I do know that isolation is a tough thing, and I also did a research article discussing what parents need to be concerned about with regards to essentially really high rate of homeschooling happening during the pandemic. That's available at cartus.ca, and I referenced Dr. Gordon Neufeld, who is the foremost expert on attachment and learning in helping parents have a little bit less stress over that, particularly for children under 6. While it's difficult to have a new normal of sort of a form of homeschooling, there are advantages that can come from not being in a school-based environment. So
I'm sorry, that's your
article.
time. And now we'll be moving to Madame Larouche pour 6 minutes.
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Thank you for the witnesses who have the courage of saying their point of view. You'll understand that as a member of Parliament from Quebec, living in Quebec, I cannot agree with a great deal of what has been said today. Either one of the witnesses can answer, but I will start with how I agree. Yes, we have to admit that Quebec has made a choice of a type of childcare. Quebec has more social democratic type measures of taking care of everyone. I think it's characteristic, and it is different compared to other provinces. We have made this choice in Quebec, and I'd also like to come back on something. I want to talk about Pierre Fortin. I know this author well. I've read many of his economic studies, we can show the positive impacts of a childcare system on the past few years. Some studies say that Quebec has made progress for women's activity. In 96, the average for women participating in the workplace in Quebec was 4 points below the Canadian average, but there has been great progression since. And this is specifically true for women who have children that are less than 15 years, or women who are alone with their children, single parents. So the studies lead us to think that approximately 70,000 women in 2000 have used the Quebec childcare system with low rate. Results are, this is not, it's good, but I would like to hear you. The other provinces will decide what they want to do as long as we have a right to maintain our system that is seen as being good. We have nothing against others choosing another system.
I'm not sure if there's a response necessary or even particularly a question, but I do stand by the provincial jurisdiction of the nature of childcare, and understanding Quebec has their system. I would speak briefly to the returning of women to the workforce after instituting such a system. I believe that the Quebec stats were different, as the member said. They were lower than the Canadian average for women's waged work labor force participation, and then they rose to increase. And certainly we saw increased labor force participation in Quebec. There's reason, I think, in peer-reviewed research to believe that wouldn't be necessarily the case in the rest of Canada, because we already have a very high labor force participation. And I also don't necessarily think that in an age of attempting economic recovery that burden needs to fall on the shoulders of mothers of young children.
And I'm just going to add, in terms of other areas, other provinces having their own jurisdiction. You know, the option that Andrea and I are talking about is direct support from the government to continue the great diversity of care that we have across the country. Refundable tax credits, because right now with subsidies, a lot of poor parents, poor mothers don't know how to access those. Refundable tax credits are very democratic, very fair, put money right into poor mothers' hands. And right now, during the pandemic, as a teacher, what I'm seeing is that more wealthy parents are able to pool their resources, create a bubble, and bring in a tutor for their children when we talk about the issue that Ms. Sadhu brought up about social isolation. So what the federal government really needs to do is quickly roll out direct support to parents. They can hire their own tutor, get 2 or 3 families together, and we've knocked out the social isolation. We've knocked out the issue of kids falling behind scholastically. So that is the way to create equity across the country.
Parfait, merci.
Thank you for that. I'm going to continue because business people where I'm from have talked about the problems that they experience when they don't have childcare spots. I'd like to come back to the fact that this model in Quebec has been cited as an example worldwide. The OECD underlines it in its recent report on social inequality. There's also unanimous research that says that the low-cost childcare spots that were rolled out in Quebec 20 years ago have had a positive effect on the activity of mothers and their young children. Pierre Fortin himself said this in 2017. He said that Quebec was a worldwide champion in terms of level of activity of young women, ahead of Switzerland and Sweden even. So Quebec has made this choice. It has worked out for us. And I'd like to hear you about that, because for economic recovery, it's been clear that the mental load has been increased during the pandemic. Working from home, homeschooling, as well as the sanitary measures of the pandemic have had an effect on mental loads. So I'd like to hear you about women's mental loads.
Sorry.
That was it for your time, actually.
Now for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I agree with my colleague from the bloc that that you've come to us with a very different point of view, and we, you know, as a committee, we hear all points of view. We respect that. However, it probably comes as no surprise that I don't agree, and I find it difficult considering throughout this report, and certainly when we were hearing from witnesses in the summer on this, repeatedly from all sectors, from all different outlooks, whether you're talking to child care experts, stakeholders in the field, the witnesses that we heard from earlier today, witnesses from the Chamber of Commerce, witnesses we actually heard in the media from the Vice President of the CIBC that childcare and more of it, universal affordable childcare, is a necessity. So I find it very difficult to juxtapose that to what you're saying today. And in terms of choices, potentially saying, I could agree that saying that we haven't put enough funding or research, or not research, funding supports into childcare to make it actually universal is true. And that we certainly need to do a lot more to ensure that when we talk about the choices that parents have, that they actually have a choice. Madame Sidhu was talking about those who have to work, parents, double income parents who earn minimum wage, which is certainly not strong enough. They have to work. They don't have choices. And that providing affordable childcare actually provides them with more choices that those in higher income rates, those with wealth, with power, those who have benefited from the privileges that our society provides actually have those choices, but people in lower incomes don't. And so ensuring that there's the options, if we compare any sort of universal system, we could compare it to the states and their healthcare system, and how people have to make very, very difficult choices where their loved ones have to either mortgage a house for the healthcare that they need. And I certainly know of parents, friends of mine, who are living on the Quebec side and then living on the Ontario side, and it's the difference between $8 a day for childcare or 60. And so those aren't real choices in my mind when we talk about a universal program. So I can agree in terms of the fact that it's not universal, but that taking that away instead of putting more supports into it is probably where we need to go. I also would like to ask a bit of a question from both of you. There was a mention about how children grow. And I know that in my community, there's an amazing group called Child Reach, and they specialize in the fact that child development is truly based on what they learn from their peers, equally from what they learn from adults, and the importance of that. But also when we talk about the isolation of those parents who can afford smaller groups, they can tutor their children. What would you say to a lot of the teachers who are finding themselves in difficult positions? They don't have in those cases, they wouldn't have the supports that they normally would in a protected workspace, potentially from a union, certainly from different kinds of laws that are provincially provided in terms of labor laws. How would you address that?
So, so first of all, I think we all agree that childcare needs to become more affordable, and we have to help parents far more. So the most affordable form of childcare is what we have right now, Ms. Matheson. And what we need is for more money. The Canada Child Benefit is fantastic. Frankly, even though I wrote an op-ed in the Globe that said fund the child, I would have done it differently. I would have given the second child half the amount as opposed to the full, because it's an economy of scale raising children. And you would then, no. It's not that the second child is not as important. It is that that money could have been redeployed more broadly. So we need refundable tax credits, but there is not, and unfortunately, I think the people that you heard from in the summer, what does an expert mean? I see that the hand-picked advisors to the Liberal government, I know the information that they are giving the government, and it is not accurate.
I apologize. We'll have to interrupt. We don't have interpretation.
Okay. So is that because of my mic or?
Yes, I think we're having significant problems. What I would suggest is for the witness to submit a brief with the answer that you would like to have to the question.
Yeah, is there any way though that, I mean, at least the English speaking people who can hear this, I would really prefer to say it, and I can still do a brief after because it's hard for me to remember what I'm saying.
Unfortunately, it's the policy of the committee that we need to have everything in the two languages of our country.
Yeah.
So
Can I try and jump in?
Yep.
Yes.
So we're speaking of choices, and the care of a child is, childcare is the care of a child no matter who does it. There is a lot of honorable work being done across this country that is completely disrespected by an Ottawa bubble that fails to recognize the beauty and diversity of that care. And choices come when we give parents more money, low-income parents more money, who can then choose to spend it in the manner that they see fit.
And if I
Certain
could just
ethnic
actually squeeze in, man, if we
communities.
talk about, sorry, if we talk about choices of parents, then how do you feel about something like a guaranteed livable income that would raise up the choices of those parents to ensure that they actually could afford what you're talking about?
I think with regards to parents and mothers and fathers at home making choices around their childcare, even large sums of money to parents to be able to make those choices is a more effective policy decision than creating a bureaucratic system where the money doesn't ever reach the majority of children. If we're going to look at models, for example, we talk a lot about Sweden. I would like to raise the model of Finland, which does fund spaces, but also gives a sizable chunk of money to parents, and under the age of 3, they can decide which they prefer to use. That's choices as well. Not saying we are giving money only to spaces and you, parent A, get money for your child care choice because you chose that particular type of care, and you, parent B, you get nothing because you don't prefer that form. Parental preference is so key on this, and I just fear that we are not getting enough of the polling and stats out there on parental preference. There is a University of Saskatchewan public policy Professor Rick August, who has written and coalesced the years of polling data on what parents prefer, and they don't prefer center-based spaces. And that's the type of care that we get when we fund federally a universal so-called system. We need to move away from that and offer parents the preferences that they say they choose, they prefer. So I'm really strong on that as well.
Good. Unfortunately, we're at the time that we have for this panel. We still have a little bit of committee business to do. So I want to thank the witnesses. I do apologize for the technical difficulties today. And as I've said, if there are things that you want to submit to the committee, I encourage you to submit the briefs to the clerk. At this point, the committee business we need to talk about is actually Tuesday, we have the minister coming for the main estimates from 11 to 1. Now, you remember it was going to be a 3-hour meeting, but unfortunately, due to a COVID exposure, our final witness representing the frontline police officers cannot appear as planned. And so on behalf of the committee, I want to thank all of our frontline workers for the amazing service that they're providing during these challenging times. But that means that we'll only have a 2-hour meeting then on Tuesday. Now, on Thursday, if the committee agrees, we wanted to have a meeting of the subcommittee of FEWO to talk about prioritizing the order of future studies. So I ask that if there are suggestions in addition to the motions that we have, that we get those. And then I just wanted to take the will of the committee. Do we want to have the subcommittee on Thursday, or do we want to have the whole committee have that discussion?
I'll go for subcommittee.
Okay, subcommittee? Very good. All right, then with that, we will have the subcommittee on the Thursday. We'll have the minister with the estimates on the Tuesday, and I declare this meeting adjourned.
Sorry, Nate.